There are places where time doesn't move forward. It just paces, heel to toe, turn, heel to toe. This is Whisper Loop. If you like stories that feel like a locked door you can't stop testing, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you do when a place starts watching you back. Now, listen to the footsteps. I worked nights long enough that daylight felt like an inconvenience. The facility called it Unit C. The officers called it the breathless wing, because the air never really turned over. No matter how many fans you ran, you could still taste sweat, bleach, and the faint iron tang of too many people breathing in too little space. My assignment was simple: the dorm corridor off the third workshop. 24 rooms, each built to hold fewer men than it did. The cells were stacked along a concrete hallway that never fully warmed in winter and never fully cooled in summer. Every 15 minutes you did a pass, check faces, check bars, check for fights, contraband, panic. Most of the real trouble happened at night, when men had nothing left to do but listen to their own thoughts. I learned to trust routine the way other people trust prayer. On my first week after a transfer, I was shown the corridor and told which rooms liked to test officers, which ones would hide a handmade shiv behind a loose tile, which ones would yell for attention at 2 a.m. just to break the quiet. Then the lieutenant pointed to a door in the middle. 16, he said. Keep your eye on it. I assumed he meant the occupants. I was wrong. Room 16 housed 5 inmates that month. There was a lifer who ran the room like a small kingdom, 2 fraud guys who treated prison like a loud inconvenience, a skinny addict who slept in short bursts, like his body never quite believed it was safe. And then there was the newest one, a quiet man named Kieran. He had the kind of face that made you forget him the moment you looked away. Not ugly, not pretty, just erased around the edges. He kept his bed tidy, did his work, didn't trade cigarettes, didn't gamble, didn't posture. He was supposed to be out within the year. I noticed him because he didn't sleep the way everyone else did. Most men in here collapsed into whatever rest they could scrape together. Kieran sat upright on his bunk for long stretches, staring at the wall opposite him as if it were a television only he could see. The first time I asked, I kept my voice casual. You all right? He blinked slowly, like I'd spoken through fog. I keep waking up, he said, to someone looking at me. Dreams, I said, because I'd heard every variation of fear men could admit without losing face. He shook his head, almost imperceptibly. Not a dream, he whispered. It's like the room is awake. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because if you treat a thing like it's harmless, it sometimes agrees. The second mistake happened a week later. On a humid evening, right after lockdown, I walked past room 16 and noticed a dark smear on the wall beside the bunks, like wet paint. The concrete had a sheen, the way it does when water finds a path, but there were no pipes there. The wall backed into an exterior stairwell. Maintenance inspected the ceiling panels, checked the line above, checked the roof. Nothing. The smear vanished by morning. It returned the next night, larger. Over the next few weeks, room 16's wall began to sweat, only after lights out. A wet shape would bloom like a bruise across the concrete. In my flashlight beam it glimmered, faintly reflective. Men asked for transfers. We denied them as we always did. Then came the smell. It arrived at about 1 a.m. like clockwork. Not sewage, not sweat, something sour, like damp cardboard left under meat. I checked vents, I checked drains, I checked bedding, shoes, food stashes. The inmates laughed at my disgust. We don't smell anything, they said, and the worst part was they seemed honest. Only staff reacted, only staff wrinkled their noses, only staff felt their stomachs flip. That's when I started dreading my route. When you work nights, you learn that dread has a sound. It's the moment the corridor gets too quiet, when even the fluorescent hum seems to dim. I began to feel watched whenever I approached room 16. Not watched by inmates, watched by something anchored to that wall. One night, I stopped at the bars and aimed my flashlight inside. The men pretended to sleep. Kieran sat upright, eyes fixed on the sweating patch. I tapped the bars. Sleep. He didn't move. Kieran, he spoke without looking at me. There's someone inside, he said. In the wall? I asked, and immediately regretted the sarcasm. His breath trembled. Yes. I brought my flashlight closer. The wet patch had taken on a shape, not quite a face, but a suggestion, a curve where a cheek might be. Two darker hollows like shallow eye sockets. A trick of moisture and light, I told myself, a brain patterning chaos into meaning. But the skin on my arms tightened anyway. I stepped back. Get some sleep, I said, forcing steadiness. Kieran's voice followed me down the corridor. It counts, he whispered. I stopped. What? He didn't repeat it. He just stared as if he'd already said too much. That week, Room 16's men began reporting dreams. Not the usual nightmares of violence or escape. They dreamed of an old woman. They described her differently. Some said she was small. Others said she filled the corner of the room without moving. But the detail that matched across all accounts was the same. She didn't speak. She just watched. When Kieran told me, his eyes were bloodshot from insomnia. She stands by the wall, he said, and she looks like she's trying to remember my name. I wanted to tell him to stop talking, because talking turns fear into a shape you can share, and shared shapes grow stronger. The night everything happened was a date most people didn't care about. For me, it sat heavy. It was the first night of a festival week, the kind of time where superstitious men start avoiding mirrors and whistling in corridors. I didn't believe in that, but I believed in patterns, and Room 16 had become a pattern. At 9 p.m., my pass was normal. At 9:15, I heard a faint tapping from inside 16, soft, like fingertips on concrete. When I stopped to listen, it ceased. At 9:30, I smelled the sourness again, stronger, like it had risen out of the wall. At 9:45, a low sound rolled through the bars, not a voice, more like a breath drawn through teeth. The inmates claimed they heard nothing. At 10, I shined my light at the sweating patch. This time the shape was clearer. It looked like a silhouette pressed from the inside. A figure leaned against the wall, as if someone had pushed a body into wet cement and let it set. My stomach lurched. I stepped away, and the hallway suddenly felt too long. At 2 a.m., I tried to rest, but I couldn't close my eyes. I kept seeing those hollows. At 3:28, the emergency bell for Room 16 shrieked. You don't think, you move. I ran the corridor with my keys, clattering against my thigh. 2 other officers followed, boots slapping concrete. Inside, the men were huddled together, faces pale. The lifer pointed with a shaking hand. Kieran lay on his bunk, stiff in an unnatural angle, face turned toward the wall. His eyes were open, not staring at us, staring past us, like something had leaned in close and held his gaze until he couldn't blink anymore. I checked his pulse. Nothing. The hallway seemed to tilt for a second. A medic was called. Procedures kicked in. My hands moved on autopilot, but all I could think was how quiet the room had become. The sour smell was gone. The wall, when I looked, was dry, not a single wet mark, like it had never sweated at all. The investigation was brutal in its simplicity. Rooms sealed, statements taken, footage reviewed. The inmates insisted nobody touched him. They swore on everything they believed in. The cameras agreed. On video, you could see Kieran around 3 a.m. He shifted, as if uncomfortable. He reached into the air with both hands, fingers clawing at nothing. Then his body stiffened. His hands fluttered around his throat, not quite finding purchase, like he was trying to pry something away that the camera couldn't see. It lasted several minutes. Then he fell back, still. No one left their bunk. No one approached. No shadow crossed the bars. In the footage, the wall behind him looked normal, dry, blank, concrete. That was the worst part, because it meant whatever happened didn't need to cross the room. It was already in the space with him. Later, an examiner wrote notes that made the lieutenant's face tighten. Marks around Kieran's neck. Not bruises you'd expect from a fight. Not the kind that matched an officer's hands. Smaller. As if the pressure came from fingers that hadn't held anything heavy in years. Old fingers, the kind that tremble. The kind that still remember a grudge. When I read that, I felt cold behind my ribs. I thought about Kieran's case file, the few lines summarizing why he was here. A theft, an accident, someone who hadn't survived the fall. A family in court begging the judge to understand what 8 years meant when you were the one still waking up alone. I thought about the way Kieran stared at the wall, and I remembered what he'd said. It counts. Like the room was measuring something. Time, breaths, steps. Room 16 sat empty for a while. Not because the facility suddenly grew compassionate, because nobody wanted it. Inmates refused the bed, Officers avoided the route. Maintenance claimed they were waiting on repairs that never came. Some nights during my pass, I would stop outside the bars and listen, just to prove to myself there was nothing, and I'd hear it. Not a voice, not tapping, something quieter. A faint, steady sound like fingertips counting against concrete. 1, 2, 3. I never stayed long enough to hear what number it reached, because I learned something in that corridor. Routine is only comforting until something else learns it. Something patient. Something that can wait 15 minutes at a time. If this story made you check the lock twice, you're not alone. Leave a comment, tell me what you think room 16 was counting, and if you want more slow burn dread like this, like and subscribe to Whisperloop. Because some places don't need to chase you,